The unmarked sedan rolled through the main gate of Naval Station Coronado just after dawn. Vera Castellano sat in the passenger seat, watching the guard wave them through without a second glance. No fanfare, no salutes. Exactly as planned. Captain Helena Morse kept her eyes on the road ahead, her grip relaxed on the steering wheel. She had picked Vera up personally from the civilian airport, another deliberate choice to keep the arrival quiet. The base was just waking up, sailors in their PT gear jogging in formation along the perimeter road, their cadence calls echoing across the morning air. Vera studied everything. The condition of the buildings, the posture of the personnel, the way the junior enlisted moved with purpose or without it. This was what she did now. After 15 years of leading teams through situations most people only saw in movies. She watched, she assessed, she reported back to people who made decisions about billions of dollars and thousands of lives. The sedan pulled up to the administrative building, tucked away from the main thoroughfares where most of the base traffic flowed. Morse cut the engine and turned to face her passenger. "I have to say, this feels unusual," Morse admitted. "Having you here without any announcement, without the proper reception." Vera offered a small smile. "That is exactly the point, Captain. People act differently when they know they are being evaluated. I need to see what really happens here, not a performance." Morse nodded, though something in her expression suggested she was not entirely comfortable with the arrangement. "Fair enough, Commander, but I still think Sullivan is going to make this interesting." The name had appeared multiple times in the preliminary reports. Petty Officer First Class Brett Sullivan, Navy SEAL, instructor, and by all accounts a talented operator with an attitude problem. Vera had read the complaints filed by junior personnel, particularly the women. Nothing that crossed into official misconduct, but a pattern of dismissiveness, condescension, assumptions about capability based on gender or perceived rank. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Have you ever worked on a military base or know someone who has? "I will handle Sullivan if necessary," Vera said simply. "Let's focus on getting me situated." They climbed out of the sedan. Vera pulled her single duffel from the back seat, standard issue gear that could belong to anyone. Inside the building, Morse led her through empty corridors to a small office that had been set aside for the assessment period. No name on the door. No indication of rank or purpose. "Your quarters are in the bachelor officer lodging, but I would keep a low profile there too," Morse said. "Lieutenant Brennan will be your official liaison, but he has been briefed to maintain distance in public. As far as anyone knows, you are a transfer waiting for final assignment orders." Vera dropped her duffel and turned to face the base commander. "How long has the morale issue been developing?" Morse hesitated, then sighed. "Honestly, about 2 years. Ever since the last round of budget cuts and the deployment tempo increased. The senior enlisted are solid, but some of the mid-level instructors, particularly in the special warfare community, have developed this attitude that they are untouchable. Sullivan is the worst of them, but he is not alone. And the junior personnel, they're scared to report it officially. Sullivan and his friends have a way of making life difficult for anyone who complains. Nothing overt, just extra training requirements, harder evaluations, being passed over for desirable assignments. It is all technically within regulations, but the pattern is clear. Vera processed this information, adding it to the data she had already compiled. This was why she had been sent, not for a routine inspection, but because someone high enough in the chain of command had noticed that a base with exceptional operational readiness scores was hemorrhaging junior talent, particularly women and minorities. The numbers did not lie, even when everything else looked perfect on paper. "I will need access to all common areas, training facilities, and personnel records," Vera said. "And I will need plane fatigues without any rank insignia." Morse handed her a package that had been waiting on the desk. "Already prepared, Commander. Everything you need, including a temporary ID that lists you as a specialist waiting for transfer. Your security clearance is not visible in the system unless someone has a need to know." Vera opened the package and examined the plain Navy working uniform inside. No name tape, no rank, no unit insignia. Just the basic uniform that thousands of sailors wore every day. It would make her invisible in the best possible way. When she emerged from the small changing room attached to the office, she looked like any other enlisted sailor. Morse studied her with something like concern. "You know, Sullivan is not going to make this easy," the captain said quietly. "He has a way of targeting anyone he thinks is beneath him." "Then I will be a perfect test case," Vera replied. She picked up her duffel and headed for the door. "I will check in with Lieutenant Brennan at 1400 hours. Until then, I am just another sailor finding my way around a new base." Morse watched her go, and Vera could feel the weight of the captain's doubt. But doubt was useful. It meant people underestimated you, and being underestimated had been one of Vera's most valuable tools throughout her career. People revealed their true nature when they thought you could not affect their future. The morning sun was higher now, and the base was fully awake. Vera walked across the compound toward the mess hall, her duffel slung over one shoulder. Other sailors passed her without a second glance. A few nodded in the casual way military personnel acknowledged each other. No salutes, no special attention. She was exactly what she appeared to be, and that was perfect. The mess hall hummed with the familiar sounds of military dining. Trays clattering, voices overlapping in a dozen conversations, the industrial hiss of the kitchen equipment behind a serving line. Vera moved through the space with practiced ease, selecting her breakfast without drawing attention. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, coffee black. Simple. Standard. She found a seat near the windows where she could observe the room. A habit formed over years of operations where situational awareness meant the difference between success and catastrophe. Even here, in the relative safety of a stateside base, her mind cataloged everything. The body language of the sailors. The way certain groups clustered together while others sat isolated. The unspoken hierarchies that existed beyond the formal rank structure. A young woman in working fatigues approached, tray in hand, hesitation written across her features. She was maybe 20, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun and eyes that darted nervously around the room before settling on Vera. "Mind if I sit here?" the young woman asked. "Most of the other tables are full." Vera gestured to the empty chair. "Go ahead." The woman sat, relief evident in the way her shoulders relaxed. "Thanks. I'm Nina. Nina Reeves, seaman apprentice. Just got here about 3 months ago." "Vera," she replied, keeping it simple. "Still getting oriented myself." Nina picked at her food, stealing glances at the other tables. "Transfer?" she asked. "Something like that. Waiting on final orders." This seemed to satisfy Nina, who nodded with understanding. "Yeah, I have heard that can take forever. The paperwork in this place is insane." She paused, then lowered her voice slightly. "What apartment were you in before?" Vera sipped her coffee, choosing her words carefully. "Various assignments. Moved around quite a bit." Before Nina could ask another question, a group of men entered the mess hall. They moved with the distinctive swagger of special warfare operators, their presence commanding attention without demanding it. At the center of the group was a man in his early 30s, muscular build, sharp features, and an expression that suggested he owned every room he entered. "That is Petty Officer Sullivan," Nina whispered, and something in her tone shifted. "Defensive. Wary. He runs a lot of the tactical training here. He is a SEAL." Vera watched Sullivan and his group move through the serving line. The kitchen staff seemed to speed up when serving them, eager to avoid any friction. Sullivan made a comment that drew laughter from his companions, though the joke was inaudible from across the room. "You train with him?" Vera asked, keeping her tone neutral. Nina nodded, her expression tightening. "Everyone has to cycle through his courses eventually. He is really good at what he does, technically, but he has this way of making you feel like you do not belong here, especially if you're a woman, or if he thinks you're not tough enough." "What happens if someone complains?" Nina laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Nothing happens officially, but suddenly your evaluations get harder. You get assigned to the worst duty rotations. Your requests for training or advancement get lost in the system. Nobody can prove anything, but everyone knows." Vera filed this information away, adding another data point to the pattern she was building. Sullivan and his group finished getting their food and claimed a large table in the center of the mess hall. Their conversation was loud, punctuated by aggressive laughter and the kind of posturing that marked insecure men trying to prove their dominance. "Has anyone tried going above his head?" Vera asked. Nina shook her head. "Sullivan is tight with most of the senior enlisted in his community. And like I said, he is technically excellent at his job. His teams have great scores. From a paperwork perspective, everything looks fine. It is just the human cost that does not show up in the reports." The human cost. That phrase crystallized something Vera had been circling around since she first reviewed this assignment. Bases were evaluated on metrics: readiness, training completion rates, equipment maintenance, operational capabilities. But those numbers could be excellent while the people inside the system were being ground down, driven out, or taught to accept behavior that corroded the very values the military claimed to uphold. "What about the officers?" Vera pressed. "They must see what is happening." Nina glanced around nervously before responding. "Some of them do, but Sullivan is careful. He never crosses the line into anything actionable. And honestly, some of the officers seem to think his attitude is just part of being a tough instructor. Old school mentality, you know? If you cannot handle the pressure, maybe you're not cut out for this." Vera kept her expression neutral, but internally she was assembling a picture that matched the preliminary reports. A culture where technical excellence was used as a shield for toxic behavior, where junior personnel were gaslit into believing that abuse was tradition, that speaking up was weakness, that survival meant accepting the unacceptable. Across the mess hall, Sullivan stood, his voice carrying over the ambient noise. "All right, listen up. PT formation in 15 minutes. Full gear. If you're not out there, you're getting written up." He made eye contact with several tables, his gaze lingering on the women present. "And I mean everyone. No excuses today." Nina checked her watch and stood quickly. "I have to go. Thanks for letting me sit here." Vera watched her hurry out, then finished her coffee slowly. Around her, sailors were clearing their trays and heading for the exits, responding to Sullivan's announcement with varying degrees of enthusiasm and dread. She waited until most of the crowd had dispersed before standing and making her way outside. The morning air was cool, carrying the salt smell of the ocean. Sailors were gathering on the PT field, forming up in loose ranks. Sullivan stood at the front, arms crossed, watching everyone arrive with the critical eye of a predator assessing prey. Vera joined the back of the formation, just another face in the crowd. Sullivan began his inspection walk, moving down the ranks with deliberate slowness. He stopped here and there to make comments, questioning someone's fitness level, suggesting another sailor looked tired, making a joke at someone's expense that drew nervous laughter from those trying to stay on his good side. When he reached Vera, he paused. "New face. Transfer," Vera replied simply. Sullivan studied her for a moment, his gaze calculating. "You look a little old to be a junior sailor. What is your specialty?" "Various duties. Still waiting on final assignment." He smirked. "Various duties. That usually means admin or support. Well, we will see how you handle some real training." He moved on without waiting for a response, but Vera could feel his attention still on her, filing her away as a potential target for later entertainment. The PT session began with a punishing pace. Sullivan led them through exercises designed to break down the weak, calling out anyone who struggled with casual cruelty disguised as motivation. Vera kept pace easily, her years of conditioning making the workout challenging but manageable. She noticed Nina struggling with the pull-ups and saw how Sullivan lingered near her, counting each repetition with exaggerated slowness, making the young woman's difficulty a spectacle for the group. This was what she had come to see, not the base as it appeared in reports and inspections, but the base as it truly functioned when the spotlight was elsewhere. And what she saw confirmed everything she needed to know. The afternoon briefing room was packed with personnel from across the base. Vera found a seat in the middle section, positioning herself where she could observe without being conspicuous. The air conditioning struggled against the body heat of nearly 100 sailors crammed into a space designed for 70. Lieutenant K. Brennan stood near the door, his eyes finding Vera for just a fraction of a second before moving on. Good. He was maintaining the distance they had agreed upon. As far as anyone in this room knew, he was just another officer attending a mandatory training brief. Captain Morse entered through the side door and moved to the podium. The room fell silent with the automatic discipline of military personnel recognizing their commanding officer. She swept her gaze across the assembled sailors, her expression neutral and professional. Good afternoon. I know you all have operational duties waiting, so I will keep this brief. We are implementing a comprehensive tactical readiness exercise over the next 2 weeks. All personnel, regardless of current assignment, will participate in rotation. A murmur rippled through the room. Tactical exercises meant long hours, physical demands, and disruption to normal routines. Vera watched the reactions carefully. Some sailors leaned forward with interest. Others exchanged weary glances. Nina, seated several rows ahead, looked nervous. Petty Officer Sullivan will be leading the exercise design and execution, Morse continued. He has put together a program that will test every aspect of our operational capabilities. Sullivan stood from his seat in the front row, turning to face the room with a grin that managed to be both confident and condescending. Thanks, Captain. Yeah, this is going to be intense. We're talking full combat simulations, tactical decision-making under pressure, physical endurance challenges, the works. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the audience. And before anyone asks, no, there are no exemptions. I do not care if you're a cook, a clerk, or a communications specialist. Everyone wears the uniform. Everyone trains like an operator. A few sailors shifted uncomfortably. Vera noticed how Sullivan's eyes lingered on certain individuals, particularly the women and anyone who looked less than thrilled about his announcement. He was already selecting his targets, the people he would push hardest to prove whatever point he believed needed proving. The exercise will be conducted in phases, Sullivan continued, warming to his subject. Phase 1 is individual skills assessment. We're going to see what each of you can actually do when the pressure is on. Phase 2 is small unit tactics. Phase 3 is a full base scenario that will run continuously for 48 hours. 48 hours, someone muttered behind Vera. That is insane. Sullivan must have heard it. He turned toward the sound, his expression sharpening. Something to share with the class. The sailor who had spoken went silent, shaking his head. Sullivan let the moment hang, enjoying the discomfort before continuing. The goal here is simple. In a real crisis, this base needs to function as a cohesive fighting unit, not a collection of separate departments. That means everyone needs to be capable, not just comfortable. So if you have been coasting on your desk job, consider this your wake-up call. Vera absorbed every word, every gesture, every micro-expression that crossed Sullivan's face. He was good at this particular kind of leadership, the type that motivated through fear and shame rather than inspiration and purpose. It worked in a sense. People would push themselves to avoid being singled out, to escape his attention. But it also created an environment of anxiety and resentment, where people performed to survive rather than to excel. Captain Morse reclaimed the podium. Training schedules will be distributed tomorrow morning. Plan accordingly with your departments. Dismissed. The room erupted into motion as sailors stood and filed toward the exits. Vera remained seated, watching the flow of people. Sullivan was immediately surrounded by his usual group, already talking through details with the aggressive energy of someone who genuinely loved what he did, even if his methods were problematic. Nina appeared at the end of Vera's row, her face pale. This is going to be brutal, she said quietly. Sullivan always makes examples out of people during these exercises. Have you been through one of his programs before? Vera asked. Nina nodded. 6 months ago. Tactical Basics course. He spent the entire 2 weeks making sure everyone knew who was struggling, who was falling behind, who did not measure up to his standards. I passed, but barely, and only because I had a few people helping me who Sullivan did not notice. What kind of help? Extra practice sessions after hours. Tips on how to handle the equipment better. Mostly just moral support, reminding me that I belonged here even when Sullivan was making me feel like I did not. Vera felt something tighten in her chest. This was exactly the kind of informal support network that emerged in toxic environments. Junior personnel banding together to survive leadership that should have been protecting them instead of targeting them. "Who helped you?" Vera asked. "A couple of the other women," Nina said. "And Chief Volkov. He is one of the senior instructors. He does not run his mouth like Sullivan, but he is always around if you need actual guidance instead of just criticism." Chief Warrant Officer Dmitry Volkov. Vera had his file memorized. 26 years of service, multiple deployments, reputation for being tough but fair. The kind of leader who built people up rather than tearing them down. The fact that he was still here while operating in the same space as Sullivan suggested either remarkable patience or strategic calculation about when to intervene. The briefing room was nearly empty now. Vera stood, and Nina walked with her toward the exit. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted everything in golden light, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the briefing room. Sullivan was holding court near the building entrance, his group of followers laughing at something he had said. As Vera and Nina approached, his attention shifted to them. Well, the new transfer in Little Reeves. His tone was casual, but there was an edge to it. "You two planning on surviving my exercise, or should I just mark you down for remedial training now?" Nina froze, her earlier nervousness flooding back. "We will be fine, petty officer." Sullivan stepped closer, invading their personal space with the practiced ease of someone who knew exactly how to use physical presence as intimidation. "We will be fine," he mimicked in a high-pitched voice. "That is what everyone says until the first night when you're cold, tired, and wondering why you thought you could hack in the military." Vera met his gaze steadily, her expression neutral. "I am sure we will manage." Something flickered in Sullivan's eyes. Interest, maybe, or the recognition of a challenge. He studied Vera more carefully now, taking in her posture, her calm, the way she did not flinch or look away. "You seem pretty confident for someone in a support role," he said. "What did you say your specialty was again?" "I did not," Vera replied simply. The sailors around Sullivan chuckled, but Sullivan himself did not smile. He nodded slowly, as if filing away this interaction for future reference. "All right then. Guess we will see what you're really made of when the exercise starts. Should be interesting." He walked away, his group following like a pack adjusting to their alpha's movements. Nina released a breath she had been holding. "You should not antagonize him," she whispered urgently. "He will make your life miserable." Vera watched Sullivan disappear around the corner of the building. "I'm not worried about Sullivan," she said quietly, "and neither should you be." But the truth was more complicated than that. Vera was not worried about Sullivan in the way Nina meant, but she was concerned about what he represented. A system that allowed talented operators to become toxic leaders. A culture that confused aggression with strength, that mistook cruelty for high standards. This was what she had been sent to assess, and Sullivan was providing all the evidence she needed. The combat simulation facility occupied an entire building on the eastern edge of the base. Vera arrived with the first group of sailors scheduled for Phase 1 assessments, the early morning air still cool and damp with ocean mist. The building loomed ahead, windowless and industrial, designed to contain the chaos of training scenarios that mimicked real combat conditions. Sullivan waited at the entrance, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 other SEAL instructors. His eyes scanned each arriving sailor with a practiced assessment of someone who had already decided who would succeed and who would fail. It was all performance, Vera knew. He had made his judgments long before anyone stepped through that door. "Listen up," Sullivan called out as the group assembled. "This facility contains 12 different scenario rooms. You will rotate through 6 of them today. Each scenario is designed to test specific skills under pressure. Decision-making, weapons handling, tactical movement, threat assessment, teamwork, and individual combat capability." He paused, letting his gaze travel across the assembled sailors. "Some of you will do fine. Most of you will discover you are not as capable as you think you are." Nina stood near Vera, her jaw set with determination that could not quite hide the anxiety underneath. Other sailors showed similar combinations of resolve and fear. This was Sullivan's specialty, creating an atmosphere where failure felt inevitable before the test even began. First rotation, Sullivan continued. 6 of you in scenario room 3. Urban combat situation, hostage rescue, multiple hostile actors. You have 20 minutes to complete the mission. His eyes landed on Vera. You, new transfer. You're team leader. The other sailors in Vera's group turned to look at her with expressions ranging from relief that they had not been selected to concern about following someone unknown. Vera simply nodded, accepting the assignment without reaction. Sullivan smiled, thin and predatory. Interesting choice, putting the admin specialist in charge. Let's see how that works out. They were equipped with training weapons, sensor vests that registered hits from the simulation rounds, and tactical gear that added realistic weight and restriction to their movements. Vera checked her weapon with practiced efficiency, her hands moving through the motions with a fluidity that came from muscle memory built over thousands of hours. One of her team members, a young man named Petty Officer Torres, watched her check her weapon. "You have done this before?" he observed quietly. "A few times," Vera replied, keeping her answer vague. The scenario room was configured as a multi-story urban environment, complete with stairs, doorways, windows, and a maze of corridors that could hide threats or hostages. Sullivan's voice came through their earpieces, providing the mission brief with clinical detachment. 6 hostiles, 3 hostages, unknown location within the structure. Rules of engagement: neutralize threats, extract hostages unharmed. Your time starts now. Vera immediately began organizing her team, assigning positions and movement patterns with quiet authority. Torres and another sailor, Seaman Daniels, took point. Nina and 2 others provided cover and support. Vera maintained overall coordination, her mind processing tactical variables with the automatic precision of someone who had led real operations where the stakes were measured in lives rather than training scores. They moved through the structure methodically. Vera used hand signals to communicate, keeping radio chatter minimal. When they encountered the first simulated hostile, Torres hesitated for a fraction of a second. Vera did not. Her weapon came up smoothly, the training round finding its target before the threat could acquire them. Through the doorway, she signaled, and her team flowed through the opening with synchronized movement that surprised even them. Sullivan's voice crackled in their ears. Interesting tactics. Let us increase the difficulty. Additional hostile actors appeared, the scenario adapting in real time to their performance. This was Sullivan's way of ensuring nobody succeeded too easily, of maintaining control over who looked competent and who did not. But Vera had trained in facilities far more sophisticated than this one, had led teams through scenarios designed by people whose job was to prepare operators for the worst imaginable conditions. She adjusted her strategy without breaking stride, directing her team to fall back to a more defensible position, using cover more aggressively, turning Sullivan's escalation into an opportunity to demonstrate proper tactical thinking under pressure. Nina spotted the first hostage through a window. "Second floor, northeast corner," she reported, her voice steadier now that they were succeeding. Vera confirmed the sighting and repositioned the team. They cleared the route with careful precision, neutralizing 3 more hostile actors before reaching the room where the hostages were held. The extraction was textbook, moving the simulated civilians to safety while maintaining security throughout. "Mission complete," came through their earpieces. 14 minutes, 30 seconds. 0 casualties. All hostages extracted, all threats neutralized. The scenario room lights came up, revealing Sullivan standing in the observation area above them. His expression was unreadable, but Vera could sense the calculation happening behind his eyes. This had not gone the way he expected. Outside the scenario room, the other waiting sailors gathered around as Vera's team emerged. Torres was grinning. "That was incredible. You made it look easy." "It was not easy," Vera replied. "You all executed well under pressure. That is what mattered." Sullivan approached, his clipboard held against his chest like a shield. Well, that was certainly a performance. Almost like you have had some advanced training somewhere. What did you say you served before this? I did not say, Vera responded calmly. The tension in the air thickened. Sullivan was not used to evasion, to people who did not volunteer information or seek his approval. He stepped closer, using his height and physical presence the way he always did. See, that is interesting to me, because most admin personnel do not move like you just moved in there. Most support staff do not run a tactical extraction like they have done it 100 times before. So either you're lying about your background, or someone gave you training you should not have. Vera maintained eye contact, her expression neutral. I have served in various capacities. Different assignments require different skills. Various capacities, Sullivan repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. He turned to address the gathered sailors. You all see this. This is what happens when someone thinks they are special. They talk in riddles. They act mysterious. They want you to be impressed without actually showing credentials. Some of the sailors looked uncomfortable. Others, particularly those who orbited Sullivan's inner circle, nodded along with his assessment. Nina looked torn, caught between admiration for what she had just witnessed and fear of being associated with someone Sullivan was targeting. Tell you what, Sullivan continued, his attention back on Vera. Since you are so capable, how about we make this more interesting? Next scenario, you go in alone. No team to hide behind. Just you and whatever I decide to throw at you. Unless you think that might be too challenging for someone with your mysterious various capacities. It was a trap, obviously. An opportunity for Sullivan to create a scenario specifically designed to make Vera fail, to humiliate her in front of everyone, to reassert his dominance over the training environment. Any reasonable person would decline, would cite regulation about team-based training requirements, would find a way to avoid the confrontation. Vera considered this for exactly 2 seconds. When do you want to run it? She asked. Sullivan's smile widened, genuine pleasure at having maneuvered someone into exactly where he wanted them. Right now. Give me 10 minutes to set it up. He looked at the assembled sailors. Everyone stays to watch. This should be educational. As Sullivan walked away to configure the scenario room, Lieutenant Brennan appeared at the edge of the crowd. His eyes found Vera, and she could read the concern there. He knew what she was capable of, but he also knew that demonstrating too much capability too soon could compromise the entire assessment. There was a careful line to walk between maintaining cover and allowing Sullivan to continue unchecked. But Vera had already made her calculation. Sometimes you had to show enough strength to stop a bully, even if it meant revealing more than you intended. The question was not whether she could handle whatever Sullivan designed. The question was how much of her real capability to reveal and what consequences that revelation would trigger. The scenario room had been reconfigured during the 10-minute setup period. Vera stood at the entrance alone, her team standing with the other observers in the gallery above. Through the reinforced glass, she could see Sullivan working the control panel with the focused intensity of someone designing not just a challenge, but a guaranteed failure. Lieutenant Brennan had positioned himself near the back of the observation area, his jaw tight. Nina stood pressed against the railing, her knuckles white from gripping the metal. Torres and the others from Vera's previous team watched with a mixture of anticipation and concern. Sullivan's voice came through the facility's speaker system, addressing the assembled observers. What you are about to see is a demonstration of why proper training and realistic self-assessment matter in the military. Our volunteer here believes she can handle an advanced solo scenario. Let us test that assumption. He pressed a sequence of buttons, and the scenario room's configuration shifted. Walls moved on hidden tracks, creating a tighter, more complex environment. The lighting dropped to dim emergency levels. Vera could hear the mechanical sounds of additional threat emulators being activated. Scenario brief, Sullivan continued, his voice taking on the formal tone of an instructor. Single operator, hostile environment, unknown number of threats, multiple objectives scattered throughout the space. You have to locate and secure 3 intelligence packages while surviving contact with enemy forces. Time limit is 15 minutes. Failure conditions include being hit more than twice, missing any intelligence package, or failing to reach the extraction point before time expires. It was designed to be impossible. The complexity, the time constraint, the multiple simultaneous objectives, all calibrated to overwhelm even experienced operators. Vera recognized it immediately as the kind of scenario Sullivan would use to break someone's confidence, to prove his point about people overestimating their abilities. "Any questions?" Sullivan asked, his tone suggesting he hoped there would not be. "Rules of engagement," Vera replied calmly. Sullivan paused, clearly not expecting that particular question. "Standard hostile environment protocols. Anything that moves is a potential threat. Distinguish between combatants and non-combatants if possible, but remember this is enemy territory." Vera nodded and checked her weapon one final time. The sensor vest registered properly. The training weapon had a full load of simulation rounds, and her gear was secured. She took a slow breath, not from nervousness, but from the practiced ritual of entering operational mindset. "Begin," Sullivan said, and the door to the scenario room opened. Vera moved through the entrance low and fast, immediately seeking cover as her eyes adjusted to the dim lighting. The room was a maze of corridors and obstacles, designed to limit sight lines and create ambush opportunities. She could hear the mechanical sounds of the threat emulators moving through the space, their programming set to patrol patterns that would converge on her location. The first intelligence package would be in the most obvious location, a test of whether she would take the easy path or recognize it as a trap. Vera ignored the obvious route and instead moved laterally, using the shadows and her knowledge of how these facilities were typically configured. She had trained in enough simulation environments to understand their underlying logic. A threat emulator rounded a corner ahead. Vera had already identified it by sound and was positioned to engage before it acquired her. 2 rounds, center mass, the kind of shooting that came from thousands of hours on ranges and in scenarios far more realistic than this one. Sullivan's voice came through her earpiece. "First contact. Lucky shot." Vera did not respond. Communication was a distraction she did not need. She moved deeper into the maze, her mind processing tactical information with the automatic precision of someone who had done this in environments where mistakes meant actual casualties. The second intelligence package was hidden in a room that required exposing herself to multiple angles of approach. Vera used a fragment of mirror she found on the floor to check corners before committing to movement. When 2 threat emulators appeared simultaneously, she engaged them in rapid succession, her transitions between targets smooth and efficient. In the observation gallery, Torres leaned forward. "How is she doing this?" he whispered to Nina. Nina shook her head, unable to look away. "I do not know. That is not normal." Sullivan's expression had shifted from confident superiority to something harder to read. He increased the difficulty, activating additional threats and shortening patrol patterns to give Vera less time to think. But she was not thinking in a way he expected. Her responses were automatic, built on a foundation of training that went far beyond what standard military personnel received. She located the second intelligence package and secured it without breaking stride. The third would be near the extraction point, forcing her to move through the most dangerous section of the scenario. This was where Sullivan expected her to fail, with a combination of time pressure and threat density would overwhelm her. Vera checked her mental clock. 8 minutes elapsed, 7 minutes remaining. Plenty of time if she moved efficiently. She advanced through the corridor using techniques that were taught in special operations courses, not in standard tactical training. Her movement was economical, her positioning strategic, her shooting precise. When 3 threat emulators converged on her position, she used the environment itself as a weapon, creating angles where they blocked each other while she eliminated them systematically. The third intelligence package was exactly where the scenario logic dictated it would be. Vera secured it and moved toward the extraction point with 4 minutes remaining. Sullivan activated a final wave of threats, throwing everything the system could generate at her in a desperate attempt to force at least one hit. But Vera had fought her way through actual combat in actual war zones. She had led teams in conditions where the enemy was real and the consequences were permanent. This simulation, no matter how aggressive Sullivan made it, was still just a simulation. She reached the extraction point with 90 seconds to spare, having neutralized every threat in her path and secured all 3 objectives. The scenario room lights came up, revealing the extent of what she had just accomplished. The threat emulators lay scattered throughout the space, each one tagged by her perfect shooting. The intelligence packages were secured, and her sensor vest showed 0 hits received. Complete silence filled the observation gallery. Sullivan stood at the control panel, staring at the results display as if it had malfunctioned. Lieutenant Brennan had his hand over his mouth, caught between pride and concern about what this meant for maintaining Vera's cover. Nina broke the silence first. "Oh my God," she whispered. Vera removed her gear methodically, checking each piece before setting it aside. She looked up at the observation gallery and found Sullivan's eyes. His expression had moved past anger into something more complicated. Confusion, respect he did not want to feel, and the dawning recognition that he had made a serious miscalculation. Sullivan activated his microphone. "Where exactly did you serve before this assignment?" It was no longer casual curiosity. It was a demand for information from someone who had just realized he was dealing with a level of capability that did not match anything in his assumptions about who Vera was. Vera met his gaze through the observation glass. "Various places," she repeated. "Various assignments." She could see him processing this, his tactical mind working through the possibilities. Admin personnel did not move like that. Support staff did not shoot like that. Standard military training did not produce operators who could solo clear an expert-level scenario designed specifically to be impossible. Sullivan's hand moved toward the communication panel, and Vera knew he was about to demand more answers, possibly even threaten to report her for misrepresenting her qualifications. But before he could speak, Chief Warrant Officer Dmitry Volkov entered the observation gallery. Volkov was a solid man in his late 40s, with the weathered appearance of someone who had spent decades in hard service. He moved to the railing and looked down at Vera with an expression that suggested he knew exactly what he was seeing. "Impressive performance," Volkov said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine authority. "Sullivan, I need to borrow the facility for the next rotation. You can continue your assessments in room 7. It was not really a request. Volkov outranked Sullivan, and his tone made clear this was a directive. Sullivan looked like he wanted to argue, to press the issue about Vera's background, but Volkov's steady gaze forestalled any objection. "Yes, Chief," Sullivan finally said, gathering his clipboard and materials. But his eyes promised Vera that this conversation was far from over. The base recreation facility was quieter in the evening hours, after the dinner rush, but before the late-night crowd arrived. Vera sat in a corner booth with a cup of coffee, reviewing mental notes from the day's observations. Her performance in the scenario room had accomplished exactly what she needed it to, forcing Sullivan to reveal more of his character, while also establishing that she was not someone who could be easily dismissed. But it had also created complications. Too many people had witnessed her capability. Too many questions were being asked. Lieutenant Brennan had sent her a carefully worded text message suggesting they needed to discuss timeline acceleration for the assessment report. Nina appeared at the edge of the booth, holding her own tray with what looked like barely touched food. "Can I sit?" she asked, her voice uncertain. Vera gestured to the opposite seat. Nina slid in and immediately leaned forward, her words coming in a rushed whisper. "Everyone is talking about what happened today, about how you handled that scenario. Torres thinks you were special operations. Daniels thinks you were some kind of instructor sent to evaluate Sullivan. Someone even suggested you might be intelligence." "What do you think?" Vera asked calmly. Nina studied her for a long moment. "I think you're not who you appear to be. And I think Sullivan knows it too, which is why he has been asking questions all afternoon. He went to Captain Morse's office, but she would not see him. Then he tried to access your service record, but apparently it is restricted. Vera absorbed this information without visible reaction. Sullivan's attempts to investigate her meant the situation was accelerating faster than planned. But it also meant he was rattled, off balance, making moves that revealed his own insecurity. I have always been honest with you, Nina. I told you I serve in various assignments. That remains true. But you're not just a transfer waiting for orders, Nina pressed. Nobody moves like that, shoots like that, thinks like that unless they have serious training. The kind of training that takes years and resources most sailors never get access to. Before Vera could respond, a group of sailors entered the recreation facility. Sullivan was at the center, surrounded by his usual followers. His eyes found Vera immediately, and he altered his course to approach her booth. Nina tensed, starting to stand. I should go. Stay, Vera said quietly. You have done nothing wrong. Sullivan reached the booth and planted his hands on the table, leaning in with aggressive familiarity. Been looking for you. We need to talk about this morning. We are in the middle of a conversation, Vera replied evenly. Yeah. Well, your conversation can wait. Sullivan's jaw was tight, his voice carrying an edge that drew attention from other tables. See, I have been doing some checking. Your service record is locked down tighter than classified operations files. Your transfer orders do not specify where you came from or where you are going, and nobody seems to know anything about your actual background. Maybe you should ask yourself why that is, Vera said, her tone still calm. Sullivan straightened slightly, and something in his expression shifted. That is exactly what concerns me. Because either you are someone important who should not be slumming around my training facility pretending to be a regular sailor, or you're running some kind of game that is going to blow back on all of us. Chief Warrant Officer Volkov entered the recreation facility at that moment, his timing either coincidental or deliberate. He took in the scene with a single glance and moved toward their booth with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew his presence alone would change the dynamic. Sullivan, Volkov said as he approached. I thought you had administrative work to finish before tomorrow's training rotation. It was not a question. Sullivan recognized the implicit dismissal and did not like it, but Volkov's rank and reputation made direct defiance unwise. He pushed away from the table, his eyes locked on Vera. This is not over, he said. Whatever you are hiding, I'm going to figure out. He walked away with his group, their voices carrying aggressive undertones as they claimed a table on the opposite side of the facility. Volkov waited until they were out of immediate earshot before sliding into the booth where Nina had been sitting. You have stirred up quite the situation, Volkov observed, his tone conversational, but his eyes sharp with assessment. Nina looked between them, clearly uncertain whether she should leave now that a senior chief had joined them. Volkov glanced at her and offered a slight smile. Stay, Seaman Reeves. This concerns you as much as anyone. He turned his attention back to Vera. I have been at this base for 8 years. I have seen a lot of personnel come through, including some very capable operators. But what you did in that scenario room this morning was exceptional even by those standards. Thank you, Chief, Vera replied neutrally. Volkov leaned back, studying her. I'm not fishing for your background. If your records are restricted, there are good reasons. But I'm going to give you some advice whether you want it or not. Sullivan is not going to let this go. His ego has been bruised, and worse, his authority has been challenged in front of the people he considers beneath him. He will escalate. I can handle Sullivan, Vera said. I do not doubt that. But the question is whether you should have to. Volkov's voice carried the weight of someone who had navigated military politics for decades. Whatever your actual purpose here is, Sullivan is now a complication that could interfere with it. And he has friends in the special warfare community who will back him regardless of whether he is right. Nina found her voice. Chief, what if someone reported Sullivan's behavior officially? The way he treats people, the way he uses training to humiliate rather than instruct. Would that make a difference? Volkov's expression turned somber. It should make a difference. But Sullivan is very careful to stay within technical regulations. He never crosses the line into anything actionable. He just makes life difficult in ways that are hard to document or prove. The sailors who complain usually end up regretting it. Vera had heard enough confirmation of what she already knew. The system was protecting Sullivan not because he was right, but because he was skilled at manipulating the system. And the cost of that protection was being paid by junior personnel who learned to accept abuse as normal. What if the complaint came from someone Sullivan could not retaliate against? Vera asked carefully. Volkov met her eyes, and in that moment Vera saw understanding dawn. The chief had already figured out more than he was saying. He knew she was not just a random transfer. He knew her presence here meant something significant. Then that complaint might actually be heard, Volkov said slowly. But timing matters. Evidence matters. And most importantly, the person making the complaint needs to have the credibility and authority to make it stick. Across the recreation facility, Sullivan was holding court with his followers, but his attention kept drifting back to their booth. He was planning something, calculating his next move, trying to figure out how to reassert control over a situation that had slipped beyond his grasp. Nina looked at Vera with sudden comprehension. "You are here to evaluate him," she whispered. "That is why your records are locked. That is why you can do things other people cannot. You're not really a transfer at all." Vera did not confirm or deny. She simply held Nina's gaze and then looked at Volkov. The chief nodded slightly, acknowledging the unspoken truth. "How much longer do you need?" Volkov asked quietly. "Soon," Vera replied. "Very soon. Then I suggest you be ready for whatever Sullivan has planned next. Because men like him, when they feel cornered, they do not retreat. They attack. And they do not care who gets hurt in the process." Vera understood the warning. She had seen it before in other toxic leaders who prioritized their ego over their duty. The next phase would be the most dangerous, not because Sullivan could actually defeat her, but because desperate people made reckless choices that created collateral damage. The question was whether she could maneuver him into revealing his true character completely, in a way that could not be dismissed or rationalized, before that collateral damage affected the junior personnel who were counting on the system to protect them. The morning of the advanced tactical scenario arrived with overcast skies and a tension that seemed to permeate the entire base. Vera arrived at the briefing room early, finding it already half full with sailors who looked nervous about what Sullivan had planned. The rumor mill had been working overtime, stories circulating about impossible challenges and guaranteed failures designed to weed out anyone Sullivan deemed unworthy. Nina sat near the back, her face drawn with lack of sleep. Torres and Daniels occupied seats in the middle section, talking in low voices. Lieutenant Brennan stood against the wall, his posture carefully neutral, even though Vera could read the concern in his eyes. The timeline had compressed faster than anyone anticipated, and decisions would need to be made soon about whether to continue the assessment or reveal Vera's true purpose. Sullivan entered exactly on time, accompanied by 3 other SEAL instructors and Chief Volkov. Interesting that Volkov was present, Vera noted. The chief had made it clear he did not approve of Sullivan's methods. Yet here he was, presumably to ensure some level of oversight. "Good morning," Sullivan began, his voice carrying the false cheerfulness of someone about to enjoy themselves at others' expense. "Today we begin Phase 2 of the Tactical Readiness Exercise. Team-based scenarios, high-stress environments, and evaluation criteria that will separate those who can actually function under pressure from those who have been coasting on easy assignments." He clicked a remote, and a display screen illuminated with a complex facility layout. "This is a simulated enemy compound. Multiple structures, unknown number of hostiles. Intelligence suggests high-value targets present. Your teams will have 45 minutes to plan and execute a coordinated assault. Failure means you restart from the beginning. And trust me, you do not want to be here all night." Vera studied the layout with professional interest. It was challenging but not impossible, assuming team leaders understood proper tactical planning and personnel management. But she suspected Sullivan would not make it that straightforward. "Team assignments are posted on the board," Sullivan continued, gesturing to a display near the door. "You will notice some interesting combinations. I have deliberately mixed experience levels and skill sets. If you cannot adapt and work with unfamiliar team members, you are not really ready for operational deployment." Sailors moved to check the roster. Vera waited, already knowing Sullivan would have arranged something specific for her. When she finally looked, her suspicion was confirmed. She was assigned as a team member, not a leader, under the command of Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Briggs, one of Sullivan's closest associates and someone known for following Sullivan's leadership philosophy exactly. Nina was on the same team, along with 4 other sailors including Torres. It was a setup, obviously. Briggs would lead in a way that guaranteed difficulty, probably targeting Vera and Nina specifically, creating a situation where Sullivan could claim their failure was due to their inability to follow proper chain of command. Teams assemble in your designated planning areas, Sullivan ordered. You have 30 minutes to prepare. Use it wisely, because the scenario starts whether you are ready or not. Vera's team gathered in Planning Room 3. Briggs sat at the head of the table with the facility layout displayed on a monitor. He was younger than Sullivan, maybe 27, with the same aggressive confidence and dismissive attitude toward anyone he considered beneath him. "All right, listen up," Briggs began. "I am running this operation, which means what I say goes without discussion. First rule, nobody questions my decisions during execution. Second rule, if you cannot keep up, you get left behind. Third rule, the mission success is more important than individual safety." "Got it." Torres raised his hand tentatively. "Should not we discuss the approach as a team? Get input from everyone." Briggs fixed him with a cold stare. "Did I ask for input? I said I am running this operation. You are here to follow orders, not to have opinions." Vera watched the dynamic unfold. This was Sullivan's methodology distilled down to its toxic essence. Leadership as dominance rather than collaboration. Authority based on intimidation rather than competence. It created teams that were fragile under pressure because nobody felt empowered to adapt when the plan inevitably encountered reality. Briggs outlined his approach, which was aggressive to the point of recklessness. A frontal assault with minimal reconnaissance, speed prioritized over security, individual roles assigned without regard for actual capability. Vera could identify at least 6 critical flaws in the plan, any one of which could cause mission failure. Nina looked at Vera with barely concealed desperation. "This is not going to work," her expression said. But speaking up would mean challenging Briggs directly, inviting the kind of retaliation that had become standard practice under Sullivan's influence. The 30-minute planning period ended. Teams moved to their starting positions in the massive scenario facility. Vera's team gathered at the designated entry point, equipped with training weapons and sensor vests. Briggs reviewed his orders one final time, his voice sharp with the aggressive energy of someone determined to prove something. "Remember, speed and aggression. We hit them fast and hard. No hosetaschen, no sekongesin. Sullivan is watching, and I am not about to fail because someone on this team could not handle the pressure." The scenario began. Briggs led them forward in a loose formation that provided neither proper security nor effective fire support. Within 90 seconds, they encountered the first defensive position. Briggs ordered a direct assault without reconnaissance or tactical positioning. Torres was hit immediately by simulated fire. Nina barely avoided the same fate by breaking from formation against orders. "Reeves, get back in position," Briggs shouted. But Nina had spotted something Vera had also seen, an alternate approach that would flank the defensive position. If they continued Briggs' frontal assault, they would all be eliminated within minutes. The scenario was designed to punish exactly this kind of leadership. Vera made a decision. She moved to support Nina's position, using hand signals to coordinate with Torres, who had respawned at the start point. Briggs was too focused on his failing assault to notice his team fragmenting around him. "What are you doing?" Briggs demanded when he finally realized Vera had moved. "I gave you direct order." "Your order will get the entire team eliminated," Vera replied calmly. "We need to flank that position. I did not ask for your opinion. Get back in formation now. I will have you written up for insubordination." In the observation room, Sullivan watched with satisfaction. This was exactly the situation he had engineered. Vera would either follow Briggs' doomed orders and fail, or she would break chain of command and provide grounds for disciplinary action. Either way, Sullivan won. But Chief Alkov watched with different eyes. He saw a team leader who prioritized ego over mission success. He saw junior personnel trapped between following bad orders and doing what was tactically sound. And he saw Vera making the choice that any competent operator would make: mission success over personal protection. Vera held her position. Torres and Nina moved to support her. Two other team members, recognizing that Briggs' approach had failed, shifted toward Vera's flanking maneuver. Briggs found himself leading a one-man assault that collapsed within seconds as defensive fire eliminated him from the scenario. "Your team leader has been eliminated," came the announcement through their headsets. "Vera, you have operational command. Continue or restart." Vera immediately reorganized the team, assigning positions based on actual capability rather than assumed hierarchy. With proper tactical coordination, they cleared the defensive position and moved deeper into the compound. The scenario that had seemed impossible under Briggs' leadership became manageable with competent command. They completed the mission in 38 minutes, extracting the high-value target and securing the intelligence with 0 additional casualties beyond Briggs' initial elimination. When the scenario ended and the lights came up, Sullivan stood in the observation room with an expression that combined rage and calculation. He had tried to create a situation where Vera would fail. Instead, she had demonstrated that his protege Briggs was incompetent and that proper leadership made all the difference. But rather than accept this lesson, Sullivan was already planning his response, and Vera knew it would not be professional or measured. The confrontation was coming, and it would force everything into the open. The debriefing room felt smaller than it actually was, packed with all 6 teams that had completed the morning scenarios. Sullivan stood at the front, his jaw tight, as he reviewed performance scores on his tablet. Briggs sat in the corner, looking sullen, his failure having been witnessed by everyone present. The other SEAL instructors flanked Sullivan, their expressions carefully neutral as they waited for their lead instructor to begin. Chief Volkov had positioned himself near the door, arms crossed, watching everything with the patient attention of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen and had decided to let it play out. "Let us discuss what we observed this morning," Sullivan began, his voice carrying an edge that made several sailors shift uncomfortably. Some teams executed their missions with proper discipline and adherence to chain of command. Others, he paused meaningfully, decided that following orders was optional. His eyes found Vera. She met his gaze steadily, waiting for the accusation she knew was coming. Petty Officer Briggs was assigned as team leader for a specific reason: to test whether team members could function within an established hierarchy even when they personally disagreed with tactical decisions. This is a fundamental military skill. You do not get to pick and choose which orders you follow based on your own assessment. Torres started to raise his hand, but Nina grabbed his arm and shook her head. Speaking up would only make him a target. "What I saw instead," Sullivan continued, "was a team member who decided her judgment was superior to her assigned leader, who broke formation, ignored direct orders, and effectively staged a mutiny during a training exercise. In a real operational environment, that kind of insubordination would get people killed." The room had gone completely silent. Every sailor present understood they were witnessing something beyond normal training critique. This was personal, a confrontation that had been building since Vera first demonstrated capabilities Sullivan could not dismiss. Vera remained seated, her posture relaxed but her attention focused. She recognized this tactic. Sullivan was creating a narrative where her competence became insubordination, where success achieved through proper tactics was reframed as failure to follow authority. It was a classic move by insecure leaders who felt threatened. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Sullivan demanded. "Yes," Vera replied calmly. The tactical approach assigned by Petty Officer Briggs was fundamentally flawed and would have resulted in complete team elimination within 3 minutes. Following those orders would have guaranteed mission failure. "I made the decision any competent operator would make under those circumstances." The sailors in the room reacted with barely suppressed shock. Nobody talked to Sullivan this way, especially not someone presenting as a junior enlisted transfer. Even Briggs looked surprised, his humiliation temporarily forgotten in anticipation of Sullivan's response. Sullivan's face flushed. Any competent operator would make, he repeated slowly. That is interesting, coming from someone whose actual qualifications remain mysteriously undefined. Tell me, what exactly makes you qualified to override the decisions of a trained SEAL team leader? Experience, Vera said simply. Judgment, results, all of which were demonstrated this morning when my team completed the mission successfully while following proper tactical doctrine. Your team, Sullivan seized on the words. Interesting choice of phrasing. Because it was not your team. It was Briggs' team. The fact that you completed the mission does not excuse the fact that you violated chain of command to do it. Chief Volkov spoke from his position by the door. The scenario rules clearly state that when a team leader is eliminated, command passes to the next capable team member. Vera assumed command after Briggs was taken out of action. Everything she did after that point was within her authority as acting team leader. Sullivan wheeled to face Volkov. With respect, Chief, that is not the issue here. The issue is her actions before Briggs was eliminated. The deliberate disregard for his orders, the undermining of his authority, the formation breaking that compromised the entire team structure. The formation breaking that saved 3 team members from immediate elimination, Volkov countered. I watched the same scenario you did. Briggs' approach was tactically unsound. Any operator with proper training would have recognized that. The tension between Sullivan and Volkov crackled through the room. This was more than a disagreement about one training scenario. This was a fundamental clash between 2 philosophies of leadership, 2 approaches to military professionalism, playing out in front of junior personnel who would learn from whichever example prevailed. Sullivan turned back to Vera, his expression hardening. Here is what is going to happen. You will be removed from the tactical readiness exercise, pending a formal review of your conduct. I will be recommending administrative action for insubordination and failure to maintain proper military bearing. And I will personally ensure that your chain of command understands exactly what kind of sailor you have proven to be. Lieutenant Brennan stepped forward from where he had been observing silently. Petty Officer Sullivan, I think before you make any formal recommendations, you should verify the proper chain of command for administrative actions regarding this sailor. Sullivan shot him an irritated look. I know proper procedure, Lieutenant. Do not presume to instruct me. I am not presuming anything, Brennan replied carefully. I am simply suggesting that her actual chain of command might have perspectives you have not considered. What are you talking about? Sullivan demanded. Before Brennan could answer, Captain Morse entered the debriefing room. Her timing was too perfect to be coincidental. She had clearly been monitoring the situation and decided it was time to intervene. The room snapped to attention automatically, the sudden formality creating a sharp break in the confrontation. As you were, Morse said, gesturing for everyone to relax. She looked at Sullivan with an expression that was difficult to read. Petty Officer Sullivan, I need to speak with you privately. Lieutenant Brennan, Chief Volkov, please join us. Everyone else is dismissed for lunch. Training will resume at 1300 hours. The sailors filed out quickly, grateful to escape the tension. Nina lingered near Vera for a moment, her eyes full of questions, but Vera shook her head slightly. Not yet. When only the key personnel remained, Morse closed the door to the debriefing room. Sullivan looked between the captain, the lieutenant, and the chief with growing confusion and what might have been the first hint of genuine concern. Captain, if this is about the training incident, I stand by my assessment. That sailor violated clear orders and compromised team integrity. The fact that the mission succeeded does not excuse the breach of discipline. Morse held up a hand. Before we continue this discussion, I need to ask you a direct question. Did you attempt to access service records for the transfer currently assigned to temporary quarters, the one you keep referring to as a junior enlisted sailor? Sullivan hesitated. I made inquiries through proper channels to verify qualifications and background. Given the unusual circumstances and capabilities she has demonstrated, I felt it was appropriate to confirm her actual service history. And what did those inquiries reveal? Morse asked. The records are restricted, Sullivan admitted. Above my clearance level, which only raised more questions about why someone with that level of classification would be here pretending to be a regular transfer. Vera watched Sullivan work through the implications in real time. She could see the moment when multiple possibilities began crystallizing in his mind. The restricted records, the mysterious capabilities, the presence of the base commander in what should have been a routine training dispute. His expression shifted from aggressive certainty to something more cautious. "Captain," Sullivan said slowly, "if there is something I should know about this sailor's actual status, now will be the time to tell me. Because if I have unknowingly been treating a superior officer or special operations personnel as a subordinate, that is information I needed to have from the beginning." Morse looked at Vera, a silent question in her eyes. The decision had always been Vera's about when and how to reveal her true identity. The original plan called for another week of observation before filing her assessment report. But circumstances had forced the situation forward, and continuing the charade now would serve no purpose. Vera stood, and in that simple action, something fundamental changed about her presence in the room. The deferential posture she had maintained disappeared, replaced by the bearing of someone who had commanded in conditions that would break most operators. "My name is Commander Vera Castellano," she said clearly. The silence that followed Vera's statement stretched for several heartbeats. Sullivan stared at her, his face cycling through expressions too quickly to catalog. Disbelief, shock, dawning horror. His mouth opened and closed twice before any sound emerged. "Commander," he finally managed, his voice stripped of its usual aggressive confidence. Vera remained standing, her posture now unmistakably that of a senior officer. "Commander Vera Castellano, Special Operations, currently assigned to Naval Special Warfare Command Assessment Division. I have been conducting a classified evaluation of this base's operational readiness, training protocols, and personnel management practices for the past 2 weeks." Sullivan took a step backward, his hand moving unconsciously as if to salute before he caught himself. The color had drained from his face. Every interaction they had shared was clearly replaying in his mind. Each dismissive comment and condescending order now recontextualized through the revelation of who she actually was. Captain Morse spoke into the stunned silence. Commander Castellano's presence here was authorized at the highest levels of the command structure. Her assessment covers all aspects of base operations, with particular focus on training effectiveness, leadership quality, and the treatment of junior personnel. Lieutenant Brennan added, his tone carefully neutral. "I was assigned as her liaison officer with instructions to maintain operational security and provide support as needed." Chief Volkov was briefed 48 hours ago when his cooperation became necessary for the assessment to continue. Sullivan's eyes moved to Volkov, betrayal clear in his expression. "You knew?" Volkov nodded slowly. "I was brought into confidence after observing Commander Castellano's capabilities during the initial scenario exercises. At that point, maintaining the assessment became more important than protecting your ego from the truth." The words landed like physical blows. Sullivan stumbled to one of the chairs and sat heavily, his carefully constructed authority crumbling in real time. "I did not know," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "How could I have known?" "That was the entire point," Vera said, her voice firm but not unkind. "An assessment conducted with prior notification produces artificial results. People perform differently when they know they are being evaluated. I needed to see how this base actually functions, how leadership actually behaves when they believe no one of consequence is watching." Sullivan looked up at her, and something in his eyes had changed from shock to a desperate kind of calculation. "Everything I did was within regulation. My training methods are aggressive but effective. My teams consistently score at the top of readiness evaluations. Nothing I did violated any official policy." Vera moved closer, her presence commanding the room. "You are correct that you operated within the technical boundaries of regulation. That is exactly what makes your approach so problematic. You have perfected the art of creating a toxic environment while maintaining plausible deniability. Your training scores look excellent on paper, which is why the issues at this base took so long to reach the attention of senior command. But people are leaving, Captain Morse interjected. Our retention rates for junior personnel, particularly women and minorities, have dropped 23% over the past 2 years. Exit interviews mention hostile training environments, feeling undervalued, and lack of professional respect. None of them specifically name you because they are afraid of retaliation, but the pattern is clear. Sullivan's jaw tightened. I push people because that is what combat requires. If they cannot handle pressure in training, they will fail when it matters. That is not toxic, that is reality. There is a difference between pressure and humiliation, Vera countered. Between high standards and targeted harassment. Between building resilience and breaking confidence. You have consistently chosen the latter approach, and you have created a culture where other instructors feel empowered to do the same. She gestured toward the door, indicating the base beyond. Nina Reeves is an exceptional sailor with tremendous potential, but she dreads your training sessions because you use her as an object lesson about weakness rather than helping her develop her capabilities. Torres second-guesses every decision because you have taught him that initiative will be punished. How many others have you damaged in the name of maintaining standards? Sullivan stood abruptly, his defensive anger returning. I'm a Navy SEAL. I have deployed to combat zones most of these sailors could not imagine. I have earned the right to set high standards and demand excellence. Your operational credentials are not in question, Vera replied. Your leadership ability is. There are SEALs who lead with competence and respect, who build teams that would follow them anywhere because they trust their judgment and value their humanity. You lead through intimidation and condescension. The fact that you get results does not excuse the cost of those results. Chief Volkov spoke quietly from his position near the door. I have served with men like you before, Sullivan. Talented operators who believed their technical skills entitled them to treat others as expendable. Some of them learned better. Others ended their careers wondering why nobody respected them despite their accomplishments. Lieutenant Brennan added, the preliminary assessment includes multiple documented instances of behavior that, while technically within regulation, demonstrates a pattern of discriminatory treatment and abuse of authority. The question now is whether you are willing to acknowledge these issues and make substantive changes, or whether this becomes a formal matter requiring official investigation. Sullivan looked between them, the reality of his situation finally settling fully. A commander conducting an official assessment, documented evidence of his behavior. The choice between voluntary correction or formal disciplinary action. His tactical mind, so quick to calculate combat scenarios, was now working through the implications for his career. What happens now? He asked, his voice subdued. Captain Morse moved to stand beside Vera. That depends on several factors. Commander Castellano will complete her assessment report. I will review her findings and recommendations. Then we will make decisions about necessary changes to training protocols, personnel assignments, and leadership development programs. Vera met Sullivan's eyes directly. I am not here to destroy your career. I am here to fix a systemic problem that has been allowed to develop because technical competence has been valued over leadership quality. You are a symptom of that problem, not its sole cause. But you are also in a position to be part of the solution if you choose to be. How? Sullivan asked, and for the first time his voice carried something other than defensive anger or aggressive confidence. It sounded almost like genuine uncertainty. By acknowledging that your approach has caused harm, Vera said. By committing to learning better methods of leadership and instruction. By using your skills and experience to build people up rather than tear them down. The military needs operators like you, but it needs leaders more. Right now, you're only one of those things. Sullivan absorbed this, his expression complex and conflicted. The room waited, the outcome of this conversation having implications that reached far beyond one training exercise or one personality conflict. Finally, Sullivan straightened, some of his composure returning. I need time to process this. All of this. Understood, Captain Morse said. You are relieved from training duties for the remainder of the week. Use that time to reflect seriously on what has been discussed here. Chief Volkov will assume leadership of the tactical readiness exercise. Sullivan nodded slowly, then looked at Vera with something that might have been the beginning of respect beneath the layers of shock and wounded pride. I apologize, Commander, for my behavior, my assumptions, my treatment of you and others. I was wrong. It was not a complete acknowledgement, not yet, but it was a start. Vera recognized the difficulty of that admission from someone whose entire identity was built on being right, being strong, being dominant. Apology noted, Vera said. What matters now is what you do with this understanding moving forward. Sullivan moved toward the door, pausing as he passed Chief Volkov. The chief met his eyes and offered a small nod. Not forgiveness, but perhaps acknowledgement that growth was possible for anyone willing to do the difficult work of change. News traveled through a military base faster than any official communication could move. By the time afternoon training resumed under Chief Volkov's leadership, every sailor on the installation knew that the quiet transfer who had been observing for 2 weeks was actually a commander conducting an assessment. The atmosphere in the training facility had transformed completely. Vera stood in the main briefing room as sailors filed in for the continuation of the tactical readiness exercise. She wore her proper uniform now, rank insignia clearly visible, the transformation from anonymous observer to senior officer complete. The reactions varied wildly. Some sailors looked vindicated, their suspicions about her unusual capabilities confirmed. Others appeared nervous, wondering what their behavior over the past weeks would mean for their evaluations. Nina sat in the front row, her expression mixing awe with something like gratitude. Chief Volkov called the room to attention as Captain Morse entered alongside Vera. The formality felt different now, weighted with the knowledge of what had been revealed and what it meant for the future of the base. At ease, Morse commanded, and the assembled personnel relaxed into their seats. She moved to the podium with the bearing of someone who had made difficult decisions and was prepared to defend them. Over the past 2 weeks, Commander Castellano has been conducting a comprehensive assessment of our training operations and personnel management. What you witnessed this morning was the conclusion of that assessment phase. I want to address some concerns directly and establish expectations moving forward. The room was absolutely silent. Every sailor focused completely on their commanding officer. First, Morse continued, nobody in this room is in trouble for how they interacted with Commander Castellano during her observation period. She was here specifically to see how we function normally, which means authentic behavior was exactly what we needed. If anything, I appreciate those of you who were honest and forthcoming in your conversations with her. Visible relief passed through several sailors. Torres exchanged glances with Daniels. Nina's shoulders dropped slightly as tension released. Second, the assessment has revealed areas where we need to improve. Not because this is a bad base or because you are inadequate sailors, but because we have allowed certain practices to become normalized that do not align with our values of respect, professionalism, and excellence in leadership. Changes will be implemented based on Commander Castellano's recommendations. Captain Morse stepped aside, yielding the podium to Vera. The commander moved forward with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to addressing groups of all sizes and ranks. Good afternoon, Vera began. I want to start by thanking those of you who made me feel welcome over these past weeks. Nina Reeves, who shared her lunch table and her honest perspective. Torres and Daniels, who worked professionally during training exercises. Chief Volkov, whose leadership style exemplifies what we should expect from our instructors. And many others who demonstrated the kind of character and competence that makes the Navy function effectively. She paused, letting her gaze travel across the assembled sailors. My assessment was never about finding fault with individual sailors. It was about evaluating systemic issues and how we train, lead, and develop our people. What I found here is what exists on many bases, a gap between the leadership we claim to value and the leadership we actually practice. Vera clicked a remote, and a presentation appeared on the screen behind her. It showed retention statistics, exit interview summaries, and performance metrics that painted a complex picture of base operations. Your operational readiness scores are excellent, Vera explained. Your technical proficiency is high. By conventional metrics, this base performs well. But when we examine retention rates, particularly among junior personnel and women, we see a different story. People are leaving not because they cannot do the job, but because the environment makes them feel unwelcome or undervalued. She advanced to the next slide, which showed comparative data from other bases with similar missions but different leadership approaches. These installations have comparable operational demands, but significantly better retention and morale. The difference is not in the difficulty of the work, but in how leadership chooses to conduct training and interact with personnel. Nina raised her hand tentatively. Vera nodded for her to speak. Commander, will things actually change? Or is this just going to be temporary while everyone knows you are watching? Nina's voice carried genuine concern rather than skepticism. Vera appreciated the direct question. That is exactly the right thing to ask, Seaman Reeves. Sustainable change requires more than one assessment report. It requires accountability systems, leadership training, and cultural shift that happens over time. Captain Morse and I have discussed implementation strategies that include all of those elements. Captain Morse stepped forward again. Effective immediately, we are establishing new protocols for training operations. All instructors will undergo updated leadership training, focusing on effective motivation techniques and professional conduct. We are implementing an anonymous feedback system where personnel can report concerns without fear of retaliation. And we are creating a mentorship program to ensure junior sailors have access to positive leadership examples. Chief Volkov added from his position near the wall, I will be personally overseeing the instructor development program. Anyone who wants to lead training here will demonstrate not just tactical competence, but the ability to build people up rather than tear them down. That is not negotiable. A sailor in the middle section raised his hand. What about Petty Officer Sullivan? The question hung in the air, everyone waiting to hear how the most visible example of the problem would be addressed. Vera handled it directly. Petty Officer Sullivan is currently on administrative leave, while decisions are made about his future role in training operations. He has been made aware of the specific issues with his approach and has the opportunity to demonstrate meaningful change. Whether he chooses to do that work will determine his path forward. She let that settle before continuing. I want to be clear about something. Sullivan is not a villain in this story. He is a product of a system that has historically rewarded aggressive leadership styles and technical excellence, while tolerating or ignoring interpersonal destructiveness. Changing that system means acknowledging our collective responsibility, not just blaming individual bad actors. Torres spoke up without raising his hand, his voice carrying conviction. But he made people miserable. He targeted certain sailors, made them feel like they did not belong. That was his choice, not just the system. You are right, Vera acknowledged. Individual choices matter, and people must be held accountable for those choices. But systems either enable toxic behavior or prevent it. Our job now is to build a system that prevents it, that makes it clear such behavior is not just discouraged but incompatible with leadership positions. She advanced to another slide showing the detailed recommendations from her assessment. Structural changes to training programs. New evaluation criteria for instructors. Regular climate surveys to identify problems early. Enhanced leadership development requirements. External review mechanisms. It was comprehensive, addressing not just symptoms but root causes. Implementation begins immediately, Captain Morse said. Some changes you will see this week. Others will roll out over the next several months. But I want every person in this room to understand that this is a priority at the highest levels of command. We will create an environment where excellence and respect coexist, where high standards and human dignity are not in conflict. Vera closed her presentation and faced the assembled sailors directly. I have served in combat zones on 3 continents. I have led teams in conditions where every decision meant life or death. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that the best leaders, the ones whose teams performed most effectively under the worst circumstances, were not the ones who led through fear and intimidation. They were the ones who built trust, who developed their people, who created environments where everyone felt valued and empowered to contribute. She gestured to encompass everyone in the room. You all have the potential to be those kinds of leaders, whether you're instructors or team members, whether you're senior enlisted or junior sailors. What we are building here is not just better training protocols. We are building a culture where that kind of leadership is expected, rewarded, and replicated. The room remained silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was not the tense quiet of people waiting for punishment or judgment. It was the contemplative silence of people processing new information and considering what it meant for their future. The final demonstration took place 3 days later in the main training facility. Word had spread that Commander Castellano would be leading a tactical exercise personally, showing the kind of leadership approach she had been advocating. The gallery was packed with personnel from across the base, far more than the exercise technically required. Even off-duty sailors had shown up, curious to see what made this commander different from other senior officers they had encountered. Vera stood in the preparation area with 12 sailors she had selected for the demonstration team. Nina was there, along with Torres and Daniels. She had also included several sailors who had struggled most visibly under Sullivan's methods, people who had been made to feel inadequate or unwelcome. And she had included 2 of Sullivan's former inner circle, sailors who had adopted his aggressive style because they thought that was what success looked like. "Listen up," Vera began, her voice carrying natural authority without aggression. "Today we are running a complex scenario that would typically take experienced teams multiple attempts to complete successfully. Our goal is not just to finish the mission, but to demonstrate how effective leadership and team coordination can achieve what seems impossible." She pulled up the scenario layout on the display screen. Multiple objectives, hostile environment, tight time constraints. The sailors studied it with varying expressions of concern. Torres spoke first. "Commander, this looks harder than anything Sullivan ever threw at us." "It is," Vera confirmed, "which is exactly why we are using it. I want to show you that difficulty is not the same as impossibility, and that proper leadership makes challenging missions achievable rather than demoralizing." She pointed to different elements of the layout. "We're going to plan this together. I will provide overall strategy, but I want input from every person here. You each bring different perspectives and strengths. My job as leader is to coordinate those strengths, not to pretend I have all the answers myself." This was already different. Sullivan would have designed the entire approach himself and simply assigned roles. Vera was inviting collaboration while maintaining command authority. Nina studied the layout carefully. "Commander, if we split into 3 elements instead of 2, we could cover these approach routes simultaneously. It would be riskier because we would have smaller teams, but we could complete objectives faster." "Good thinking," Vera said immediately. "What are the risks with that approach, and how will we mitigate them?" The discussion that followed was professional and productive. Sailors who had been taught to stay silent and follow orders without question found themselves contributing ideas that were taken seriously. Even the sailors from Sullivan's inner circle, initially skeptical, began engaging with the planning process as they realized their input was genuinely valued. After 30 minutes of collaborative planning, they had a solid approach that incorporated elements from multiple team members. Vera had guided the discussion, keeping them focused and ensuring the plan remained tactically sound, but the final strategy was truly a team product. In the observation gallery, Chief Volkov stood next to Captain Morse. The captain spoke quietly. "This is what I was hoping to see. Leadership that builds capability rather than dependency." Volkov nodded. "Watch how our team responds under pressure. That will be the real test." The scenario began. Vera led her team into the facility with calm confidence, communicating constantly, but never micromanaging. When Torres hesitated at a decision point, she did not criticize. She asked what he was seeing and what options he was considering. When he explained his thinking, she validated the sound parts and provided guidance on the gaps, all in real time, without making him feel inadequate. Nina's three-person element encountered unexpected resistance at their first objective. Rather than panic or wait for explicit orders, Nina adapted using principles Vera had discussed during planning. She repositioned her team, used available cover effectively, and solved the problem with initiative that would have been punished under Sullivan's leadership, but was exactly what Vera had been encouraging. The two sailors from Sullivan's former group initially tried to operate with the aggressive independence they had learned, charging ahead without coordination. Vera corrected them firmly but respectfully, explaining why their approach compromised the team and showing them how to channel their aggression more effectively. They absorbed the feedback and adjusted, discovering that competence and cooperation were not mutually exclusive. 15 minutes into the scenario, they hit a major complication, an unexpected defensive position that their planning had not accounted for. This was the moment that would define whether Vera's approach actually worked under pressure. Vera immediately gathered her element leaders for a rapid assessment. "Talk to me. What are we seeing, and what are our options?" Torres spoke first. "We could try to flank, but that would take time we do not have." Daniels added, "Or we could suppress an assault, but that would cost us casualties." Nina offered a third option. "There is a service corridor on the left side of the structure. It is not part of the main layout, but if it connects where I think it does, we could bypass entirely." Vera considered all three options in seconds. "Nina, take your element and check that corridor." Torres, set up to provide suppression if needed. Daniels, position for assault, but hold until I give the order. We try to bypass first, but we are ready with alternatives. It was decisive leadership that incorporated team input and maintained multiple options. Nina's element found that the corridor did indeed provide access past the defensive position. They bypassed the obstacle entirely, maintained momentum, and completed the scenario with time to spare. When the exercise ended, the observation gallery erupted in applause. Not just polite recognition, but genuine enthusiasm from sailors who had watched something fundamentally different from what they were accustomed to. In the debriefing, Vera addressed the team and the larger audience watching from the gallery. "What you just witnessed was not special operations magic or secret techniques. It was basic leadership executed properly. Respect for the people you lead. Trust in their capabilities. Willingness to adapt when circumstances change. Communication that builds understanding rather than just transmitting orders." She looked at Nina directly. "Seaman Reeves provided the tactical solution that made our success possible. Under some leadership styles, her idea would never have been heard because junior personnel are not expected to contribute. That is a catastrophic waste of talent and perspective." Torres raised his hand. "Commander, what do we do if we end up with instructors who still lead the old way? How do we handle that?" "You hold them accountable," Vera said firmly. "You use the new reporting mechanisms. You support each other. And you remember that bad leadership is not inevitable or acceptable. It is a correctable problem, and you have the power to be part of that correction." She addressed the broader audience now. "Some of you are wondering if this approach is too soft for military operations. I have led teams in combat, real combat, where the enemy was trying to kill us, and the mission objectives were measured in lives saved or lost. And I can tell you that this approach, leadership based on respect and capability development, produces more effective teams than leadership based on fear and intimidation. Every single time." Chief Volkov stepped forward to join her. "The chief is going to continue developing these principles with all training personnel. What you saw today becomes the standard, not the exception." Captain Morse addressed the assembled personnel from the gallery. "This base is changing. Some of you will embrace that change immediately. Others will need time to adjust. But everyone will be expected to meet the new standards. Excellence and respect are not competing values. They reinforce each other." After the formal debriefing concluded, sailors gathered around Vera asking questions, seeking guidance, sharing their own experiences. Nina approached with tears in her eyes. "Commander, I never thought I would feel like I actually belonged here. Like my ideas mattered. Thank you for showing us what leadership should look like." Vera put a hand on the young sailor's shoulder. You always belonged here, Nina. You just needed leaders who recognized that. Now your job is to remember this feeling and recreate it for others when you are in positions of authority. Torres and Daniels joined them, along with several other sailors who had been part of the demonstration. They were animated, discussing the exercise and comparing it to their previous training experiences. The energy was completely different from the tense, fearful atmosphere that had characterized Sullivan's sessions. Even the two sailors from Sullivan's inner circle approached, their earlier skepticism replaced with something more thoughtful. One of them spoke hesitantly. "Commander, we thought Sullivan's way was the only way to be tough and effective. We were wrong. Is it too late for us to learn better?" "It is never too late," Vera assured them. "Recognizing the problem is the first step. Committing to change is the second. Actually doing the work of becoming better leaders is the third. You're already on that path." As the crowd gradually dispersed, Chief Volkov remained. He studied Vera with the assessing gaze of someone who had seen many leaders over many years. "You know, this will not solve everything overnight. Culture change takes time. Some people will resist." "I know," Vera replied, "but we have started something important here, and we have given these sailors a different vision of what leadership can be. That matters more than quick fixes." Volkov nodded slowly. "Sullivan asked to speak with you, by the way. He has been watching the demonstration from a private observation room. I think seeing it affected him more than all our previous conversations combined." Sullivan waited in Captain Morse's conference room, standing near the window with his hands clasped behind his back. He looked different than he had during their last interaction. The aggressive confidence was gone, replaced by something more uncertain but also more genuine. When Vera entered, he turned to face her and came to attention automatically. "Commander," he said formally. "At ease," Vera replied, gesturing for him to sit. "Chief Volkov said you wanted to speak with me." Sullivan sat, but his posture remained rigid. "I watched the exercise today. The whole thing, from planning through execution." He paused, struggling with words. "I've been doing a lot of thinking over the past few days. About my methods, my assumptions, what I thought leadership meant." Vera took a seat across from him and waited. This was his moment to speak, and she would not rush it. "I convinced myself that being hard on people was the same as preparing them for reality," Sullivan continued. "That making them uncomfortable was building resilience. That if they could handle my training, they could handle anything." He looked directly at Vera. "But watching you today, seeing how your team responded, how they solved problems and adapted under pressure, I realized something. My approach was not building better sailors. It was just making them afraid of me." "That is an important recognition," Vera said quietly. Sullivan's jaw tightened, emotion breaking through his controlled exterior. "I joined the Navy because I wanted to serve something bigger than myself. I became a SEAL because I wanted to be the best, to operate at the highest level. And somewhere along the way, I started believing that being the best meant proving I was better than everyone else. That leadership meant domination rather than development." He stood and moved back to the window, his reflection visible in the glass. "I think about Nina Reeves. She has potential, real potential, and instead of cultivating that, I made her doubt herself every single day. I think about Torres, who should be confident in his tactical thinking, but second-guesses everything because I taught him that initiative would be punished. I think about how many sailors transferred out or left the Navy entirely because I made them feel like they did not belong." Vera let the silence settle before responding. "The fact that you are thinking about these things means growth is possible. The question is what you do with that understanding." Sullivan turned back to face her. "I want to learn better. I know that sounds inadequate given the damage I've caused, but I mean it. I watched how you led today, how you made people feel valued while still maintaining standards and achieving objectives. That is what I should have been doing all along. Change like that requires more than just intention," Vera said. "It requires humility, ongoing effort, and accountability. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes," Sullivan said without hesitation. "I spoke with Captain Morse yesterday. I have requested assignment to the Leadership Development Program at the Training Command. 6 months of intensive instruction on modern leadership methods, coaching techniques, and organizational psychology. After that, if I am allowed to return to training duties, I want to do it right. Vera studied him carefully, looking for signs of performance or manipulation. What she saw instead was genuine shame mixed with determination, the complex expression of someone confronting uncomfortable truths about themselves. That is a good start, she acknowledged. But I need you to understand something. The sailors you affected, people like Nina and Torres, they do not owe you forgiveness just because you have realized your approach was wrong. Earning back trust is a long process, and some of them may never trust you regardless of how much you change. I understand, Sullivan said, and I accept that, but I still want to try. Not for me, for them. For the next generation of sailors who deserve better than what I gave. There was a knock at the door. Captain Morse entered, followed by Chief Volkov and Lieutenant Brennan. The captain carried a folder that Vera recognized as the final assessment report. Commander Castellano, your findings have been reviewed by the regional command. They are implementing your recommendations across multiple installations, not just this base. Your work here is going to have impact far beyond what we initially anticipated. Vera accepted the folder but kept her attention on Sullivan. And what about Petty Officer Sullivan's future? Captain Morse looked at Sullivan with an expression that mixed disappointment and cautious hope. His request for the Leadership Development Program has been approved. Upon successful completion, he will be eligible to return to training duties under probationary status with regular evaluations and mentorship from Chief Volkov. Sullivan nodded, accepting the terms without argument. Chief Volkov spoke directly to him. This is not a punishment assignment, Sullivan. It is an opportunity, but you need to approach it with genuine openness to change, not just going through the motions to get back to where you were. I will, Sullivan promised. He looked at Vera again. Commander, I know this does not make up for anything, but I am sorry. For how I treated you, for how I treated everyone. I was wrong about what it means to be a leader, and I'm grateful you're giving me a chance to learn better. Vera stood and extended her hand. Sullivan took it, and they shook firmly. What you do from this point forward will define your legacy more than what you did before. Make it count. After Sullivan departed to begin his transition process, Vera remained with the command staff to finalize the details of implementation. The conversation was detailed and practical, covering everything from revised training curricula to the new feedback systems to the timeline for instructor recertification. Hours later, as evening settled over the base, Vera found herself walking the perimeter one final time. Her assignment here was complete, and tomorrow she would depart for her next evaluation at a different installation. But the work she had started would continue long after she left. Nina appeared from the direction of the barracks, clearly having waited for an opportunity to speak privately. Commander, I heard you are leaving tomorrow. That is correct, Vera confirmed. My assessment is complete. Nina struggled with her words for a moment. I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. For showing us that we deserve respect. For proving that good leadership exists. For giving us hope that things can actually change. Vera smiled. You did that yourself, Nina. You and Torres and all the others who refused to accept that toxic leadership was normal or acceptable. My job was just to document what you already knew and give it official weight. What happens now, Nina asked. After you leave, what if things go back to the way they were? They will not, Vera said with certainty. Captain Morse is committed to these changes. Chief Volkov will ensure the new standards are maintained. And you all now know what good leadership looks like, which means you will recognize and resist bad leadership when you encounter it. That knowledge is powerful. Nina nodded, then surprised Vera by coming to attention and rendering a sharp salute. Thank you, Commander, for your service and for caring enough to make this right. Vera returned the salute. Thank you for your honesty and courage, Seaman Reeves. The Navy is better because you are in it. As Nina walked back toward the barracks, Vera continued her circuit of the base. Lights were coming on in buildings across the installation. Sailors were finishing their duty shifts, heading to dinner, gathering in recreation facilities. The base looked the same as it had 2 weeks ago, but something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. Lieutenant Brennan joined her near the main training facility. He had been an effective liaison throughout the assessment, maintaining her cover while providing crucial support. He said conversationally, "I have been involved in 3 of these assessments now. This is the first one where I actually believe the changes will stick." "Why is that?" Vera asked. "Because you did not just identify problems and recommend solutions. You showed people what better leadership looks like. You gave them a vision they can work toward instead of just a list of things to avoid. That makes all the difference." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Brennan spoke again. "Where are you headed next?" "Another base with similar retention issues and complaints about training culture. Different specifics, same underlying problems. It seems leadership failure is more common than we would like to admit." "Then it is good we have people like you doing this work," Brennan observed. Vera considered this. The military she had joined decades ago was supposed to embody certain values: honor, respect, commitment to something larger than individual ego. Somewhere along the way, some leaders had lost sight of those principles, and systems had emerged that protected technical competence while tolerating interpersonal destructiveness. Changing that required more than policy updates. It required cultural transformation, one base and one leader at a time. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment, or share if you have ever witnessed someone whose hidden rank or qualifications completely change a situation. Have you seen leaders transform from toxic to positive, or experienced the impact of truly good leadership in your own life? The next morning, Vera departed Naval Station Coronado in the same unmarked sedan that had delivered her 2 weeks earlier. In her briefcase was the final assessment report that would influence training protocols across the entire naval special warfare community. But more importantly, she left behind sailors who now understood they deserved better, leaders who were committed to providing better, and a culture that was beginning to shift toward the values it claimed to uphold. As the base disappeared in the rearview mirror, Vera thought about Nina's question. What happens now? The answer was both simple and profound. Now the real work began, the daily effort of maintaining standards, holding leaders accountable, and choosing respect over domination. It was not dramatic or easy, but it was essential. And somewhere on that base, Sullivan was beginning his own journey toward becoming the leader he should have been all along. Whether he succeeded or failed was up to him, but at least now he understood what success actually looked like. The sedan merged onto the highway, carrying Vera toward her next assignment, her next assessment, her next opportunity to make the military live up to its own ideals. The work was never finished, but every base that changed, every leader who grew, every sailor who felt valued and respected, that was progress worth fighting for. And in a conference room at Naval Station Coronado, Captain Morse was already implementing the first wave of changes, transforming policy into practice, turning assessment findings into actual cultural shift. Chief Alkov was redesigning training curricula. Nina was studying for her advancement exam with renewed confidence. Torres was learning to trust his own judgment again. The ripples spread outward, touching lives and changing trajectories in ways large and small. That was the real power of good leadership, not in grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but in the steady accumulation of better choices, healthier cultures, and people who felt empowered to become the best versions of themselves. And that, ultimately, was what service meant.